Hello and welcome, I'm Maria from Sew Through Time, and this time we're taking a look back at what I made in 2023. I actually have a few making videos lined up and a few historical experiment videos and some hair videos lined up, but I got sick halfway through December and have been sick ever since, and now I can finally make a video. So I decided that instead of doing the more, like heavy duty videos, I would just do a fun, quick look back at last year's makes. Last year was pretty sporadic making, like there was several times where I didn't make something for quite a long time, and then I made a lot of fairly easy things, and then I made actually a bunch of like big projects where I made everything from the underwear out. All in all, I made 23 different things for myself, and then I made a few things for family members, but I'm not going to go into those now because I'm going to focus on the things that I made for myself. Let's look at first the different kind of corsets and stays I made. I started the year with a 1920s corset. And yes, 1920s do still have corsets, and I have a separate video on the entire underwear for that 1920s look that you can go watch if you want to. And along with the corset, I also made the brassiere and an envelope chemise to go with it. The idea of a 1920s underwear, and especially the corset, is not to make you more curvy, but instead to smooth out lines. And in my case, because I am fairly curvy naturally, it actually cinches in not my waist, but my upper hip area, making that line smoother and less drastic. And the next thing I made was a pair of 1780s stays. That's basically a corset, but they were called stays in that era because of the different construction methods. And if you're interested in learning more about the different names for corsets and how they evolved through time, I do have a separate video on that again as well. I also have a separate video on making the 1780s stays, where I go into more of the details of how stays were made historically. I do not make them completely historically. I do use a sewing machine for the boning channels simply because I ain't got the time for that. These were actually the final pair. They were like my third mock-up, basically. And while I was very pleased with the shape, the fabrics actually stretched a lot less than I anticipated, a lot less than my previous mock-up fabrics had. So actually, they have a bit more of a lacing gap than I had intended. So this year's project will definitely be to make another pair of 1780 stays. They work with the bigger lacing gap. It's just that when the front lacing gap is that big, it requires, because the way gowns work in the 18th century is that they're mostly pinned on to the stays. And because there is that wider lacing gap in the front, it needs quite a bit of an overlap for the gown for me to be able to pin it properly to the stays. So that can kind of cause problems with especially older makes, which don't have quite as much bust room as I would make things nowadays. So that can sometimes lead into problems, so that's why I will be making another pair of stays. Then I made an early 1870s corset, specifically from 1872. And this I am not exactly happy with. The bust room just it was weird. And when I had it with bigger bust room, it didn't fit me right. And then when I took it in at the bust, then as you can see, it is slightly small on the bust. And just the shape in general of this corset didn't really work for my body that well. So I ended up, this works perfectly fine as like a day corset that I can wear because it doesn't cinch me in. It is very comfortable to wear and very easy to wear. But I did later on in the year make another one that is actually from the very, very late 1860s, but works well. It has the same silhouette as the 1870s one. And this one is a much better shape, but as you can see, it's super curvy and it is very dramatic looking, but it is still very comfortable. It's still one of the most comfortable corsets I have. There is a little issue because it is so high-waisted, or the hip area doesn't like come low like normally corsets do in this era, that it tends to a little bit like look wonky because apparently my one hip bone is slightly more forward than the other one. Like, they're the same height, it's just that the other one like curves more forward, and that shows for some reason in this era's corsets. But again, that's not a big issue. It doesn't show, like it doesn't affect comfort, it doesn't affect the outer clothing, it just makes it so that the corset sometimes you can see that it's a little uneven. And whereas the first bustle era has a very low bust line, the second bustle era is actually the opposite and has a very high bust line. So I made an 1880s corset as well. This one turned out fairly well. I enjoy it. It does have a little bit of a larger lacing gap than I usually wear. But other than that, it's a really nice corset, and this was kind of a mock-up because I wasn't sure how this would fit on my body. I didn't actually make any clothing from the 1880s or like the second bustle era this year, and I am planning on doing that in the future, but I think I might want to play around with another corset pattern and see how that works on my body before I start making the outer clothing. And then my very last project of the year was a late Edwardian era corset. I will be explaining more about that in the future because I will be doing a separate video on this and explaining about Edwardian era corsets in general and how the silhouette changes throughout the Edwardian era. But for now, just here's the corset. And now that we've finished going through all the corsets that I made, there was also a pair of just underwear that I made from the 1940s. And I did also do a separate video on them, on the bra, and and there's also a free pattern that goes with it. And now on to the actual clothing that I made. I started off the year by making a 1922 evening gown. It's actually a reproduction of an evening gown in the V&A. That one originally was an ivory satin, and I made mine out of a navy charmeuse satin. And then the next project was hopping on to a new era, and that I did do a video on, my 1850s day gown. It has a separate skirt and a bodice, even though the style that I was most looking at would have usually been those two connected, but because I wanted to make them for modern convenience separate so that I can also wear the skirt with other bodices and jackets that were also extremely fashionable in the 1850s. And next I time hopped to 1897 and made a full ensemble with a skirt, blouse, and a bolero jacket. This was actually a really quick make, and I really have enjoyed wearing these pieces and incorporating them also into my daily wardrobe. The next item, a 1912 silk dress, was also an item that was just for my daily wardrobe. Something a little bit nicer, but something that still can be worn in my daily life. And since I made that 1870s corset, I also needed clothing to go with it. So I made an 1872 polonaise gown that is a day gown that can also go for evening with different accessories for like dinnerware and things like that, like more casual things. And definitely it can also be worn as afternoon wear. And then because I have absolutely no rhyme or reason why I hop from era to era, I went back to the 19-teens, specifically 1910, and made a lingerie dress, but something that would work for a cooler climate that I live in for more like year-round wear, not just summer wear, so I made it out of a light wool. I also have a video on that if you're interested. And then I made another stash busting project. This one was intended for both costuming and daily wardrobe purposes, something that I did wear quite a bit in the summertime. My 1810 Regency gown. It has detachable lower sleeves so that it can be both long sleeves and short sleeves. And it is a cotton linen mix, so it's extremely comfortable in heat. And then because I had a mid-Victorian event that I was going to, I needed a bonnet. And I wanted something that works both for my 1840s and 1850s stuff. So I made a basic straw bonnet. Well, I took a basic straw hat and made it into a bonnet. And I do have a video on that too. And the next item didn't get much use. Well, it got some use, but it didn't get much video or photo time because of the SAG-AFTRA strike. It was an accidental cosplay, actually. I just wanted a 1908 like summer dress. When I chose this linen that I had in my stash, I didn't really like dawn on me that it would actually end up looking like the perfect Jane Porter cosplay, but set in the Edwardian era. But when I finished it, it was very obvious, and I so wanted to take pictures of it, but because I didn't want to promote anything that was in the strike, so I didn't do that. So that is something to look forward to doing this year. And the next thing was also a summer wardrobe item, a 1917 blouse and skirt. And then I got into my sewing for a September event that was a Victorian house party. And I decided to go with the first bustle era since I had already made the polonaise gown earlier that year. So I needed a wrapper for morning wear, something that I could wear when going to breakfast with all the other people who were staying at that hotel. I have made quite a bit of wrappers or tea gowns or like casual leisure wear things throughout the years, but this is by far the fanciest that I've ever made. And even this is still fairly simple. I just tend to gravitate towards the more simple things. But I have definitely worn this at home too, and I absolutely love this, and this will definitely be also a wardrobe staple. And of course that event, since we were having dinner, it needed also an evening gown. Dinner gowns were actually a separate item in this era, and this is, I made an evening bodice that would be definitely more of a ball gown bodice in the era. But because we don't actually live in the Victorian era, and I wanted a ball gown, I decided to make a ball gown. I had just enough silk left from the skirt project on the polonaise to make the overskirt and the bodice for this. And since all of my other projects this year had been 19th or 20th century, I decided to go in a completely different direction and hop into the Viking era. I do have a video on making all the different layers for this outfit if you're interested in that. And in the fall, I was quite tired. I didn't get a lot of things done, and also I didn't have any events coming up, so I ended up just wardrobe building. I made a blouse and a skirt that make together a nice ensemble from about 1916. Yeah, this was a stash busting project, and I decided I like the blouse so much that I also made another blouse out of black silk that matches my 1914 skirt, but also it can be worn with the later skirts or other 19-teens era things that I have. And then I knitted long stockings. I wanted something stripy because stripes were actually really common in the Victorian era. I actually started a 1790s gown earlier in the summer, but I didn't ever finish it. It was like missing the hem and shoulder straps. That's it. But I finished it for a friend's Christmas party in December, so now that is also finally done. It still needs a proper petticoat. I have a Regency petticoat that I wore with it, but that one is a bit narrower than I would really want. I would want a fuller 1790s one, but I haven't had time to make that. So that is definitely another thing that I want to make next year, or this year, that is. And then as December rolled in and cold temperatures rolled in, I decided to finally make for my natural form era things a coat. And instead of making a regular coat, I decided to go for a cape dolman thing that I have a video on where I go into more of the details on what it actually is. And so yeah, that ended up, that and the late Edwardian corset ended up being my last makes for this year. I did have plans on making one other thing, but I never got it even to starting it before I got sick, and then I just basically slept the rest of December, so nothing got done. So that's really all the things that I made last year for myself. Like I said, I did make a few items for family members to go to events, but other than that, I think that's pretty much it. I might have made a few lingerie items that I have forgotten about, but I'm not like sure. That's at least all the bigger projects. And I'm kind of running out of voice here, so I am just going to conclude with, other than the items that I already mentioned that I have plans for making in this year, I don't really have any big plans other than I know I want to make some 18th century things. And also, I am going to continue with building my 19th century wardrobe, so those missing silhouettes in between, I hope to finish that this year so that I can make a video where I show you all the different silhouettes of the 19th century. But other than that, I don't really have big plans. I don't have any events that I know of that I'm going for sure yet, so I don't know. And I mean, I am sure that I'll figure out more wardrobe building things, but as of right now, I can't think of anything that I desperately need. So yeah, we'll just see where it goes. I don't know yet. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please hit that like button because it really does help out. And I will see you again with a corset video, hopefully in a week or two, depending on how my voice can handle speaking this much. But other than that, I'll see you again next time. Bye!